One winter night, a lonely woman gives her blanket to a stranger on the verge of freezing to death. By morning, 7 warriors stand in front of her home, and one of them says just one sentence. "You gave him a blanket last night. Now you're his wife." Was it all just a strange misunderstanding, or fate itself about to change her life forever? If you're ready, let's dive into this unforgettable story together. We're just a few steps away from reaching our first 1,000 subscribers, our growing family. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you to everyone who's brought us this far. With your support, we grow stronger with every story. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Winter had choked the breath out of the earth. The wind whipped the bare branches like lashes, sealing the night with ice. Lena Hartmann, hands in her pockets, wearing an old wool coat from years ago, had stepped out one last time to check the farm's fences. She didn't know why the weather was raging so angrily, but it felt like nature was trying to say something, maybe a warning, maybe a punishment. The crunch of her steps over the snow-covered ground echoed into the silence like the sound of her own frozen solitude. Every step felt like the sound of her loneliness. A few days ago, wolves had come close to the barn. Lena was used to night shifts, but this night felt different. The wind seemed to whisper a name, and the snowflakes were racing with her loneliness. When she reached the old oak tree, a strange silhouette caught her eye. At first, she thought it was a log, but when it didn't move, a chill ran through her body. Her hand instinctively reached for the rifle on her back, but she didn't raise it. As she got closer, the figure came into focus. A young man, maybe even just a boy, but the way he held himself, the bend in his knees, it carried a rage and pride that seemed older than his years. His skin was somewhere between brown and bronze. His hair fell to his shoulders, and one side had bits of ice clinging to it. His eyes were open, fixed on one spot. He was shaking, but with pride. He didn't speak, but his presence screamed, "Don't leave me." Lena stepped in a bit closer. She knelt down, leaving an imprint in the snow. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice as soft as the wind. No reply. The boy's hands were purple from the cold, his lips cracked. All he had on was a torn shirt that looked like a windbreaker and thin pants. His shoes had already given up. Still, he sat up straight. Lena reached into her inner pocket and pulled out her father's old wool blanket used in the war once, with blue threads stitched along the edges as a keepsake. She hesitated, then unrolled the blanket, shook off the snow, and laid it gently over his shoulders. She waited for some kind of reaction, but nothing came. Just as she was about to stand, the boy turned his head and met her eyes. It was only a second-long glance, but something inside Lena untangled. The look wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was the space between survival and surrender. Lena stood up. "You either freeze here or you walk," she said. Slowly, the boy grabbed the blanket and stood with careful, quiet movements. He started walking. Without a word, without looking back, he walked into the snow. The wind suddenly picked up, and the silence that followed hit just as hard as that glance. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lit and unlit the lantern, boiled something, randomly went down to the barn, checked the chickens, looked over the dairy room door 3 times. The silence of that boy seemed to be floating around the corners of the room. It wasn't just a life she'd saved, it felt like she had touched the beginning of something. She didn't know what, but she could feel it in her bones. In the morning, the fog slowly faded. Snow was still falling, and the world was covered in a gray haze. When Lena stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee, her heart nearly stopped. At the edge of the field, just past the boundary, 7 riders stood. None of them moved. An old man in front. Beside him, the boy from the night before, still with the blanket on his shoulders. Lena held her breath. Her eyes locked on the shining silver eagle on the old man's chest. The silence was heavier than the wind. Lena stepped forward in the snow. The old man quietly got off his horse. He walked carefully, as if carrying the weight of centuries in his eyes. "My name is Elias Blackhorn," he said. "This is my son, Noah." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "The blanket you gave him last night. In our ways, that's a bond. Not ownership, but witness. A warming hand, a life protected. When a woman gives a man a covering, it means something. It has been seen." Lena's hands trembled. "I just wanted to help." Elias bowed his head. "And we don't forget." The others got off their horses. Lena looked at Noah. He still didn't speak. but his eyes were darker than the night before. Something stirred inside Lena. It wasn't fear. It wasn't regret. It felt like reckoning, like a road life never asked her to walk but put right in front of her anyway. In that moment, she understood. That blanket wasn't just a covering anymore. That night wasn't just a night of kindness. And Noah wasn't just a boy. He was a shadow that clashed with her past and her future. And this was just the beginning. Noah didn't say a single word that day, but his presence felt like the sum of all the silences that filled Lena's small house. He sat in the corner of the kitchen, didn't look around, didn't touch his food. The blanket was still wrapped around his shoulders, not just a shield from the cold anymore, but a wall between him and Lena's life. When Elias Blackhorn and the 6 other men stood silently in front of the house, looking Lena straight in the eyes, she knew deep down this wasn't just a visit, it was some kind of test. "We'll stay until tonight," Elias had said. "Tomorrow, there are things we need to talk about." That sentence had settled deep in Lena's spine. Everyone else left. Only Noah stayed. Lena didn't ask why. Asking meant being ready for the answer. And that night, she only wanted silence. But silence didn't bring peace the way she expected. On the contrary, it piled up questions like an avalanche. Close to midnight, a sharp whistle from outside startled her. She quickly turned off the lamp and moved to the window. In the distance, near the barn, something was moving. A shadow, slipping fast and quiet through the dark. Lena grabbed her rifle. She'd been through moments like this before, but this time, something felt different. It wasn't the hostility she knew. It smelled of a threat she didn't recognize. She headed for the door, but before she could reach the handle, Noah appeared behind her, silent as a ghost. His eyes were turned to the darkness. He tilted his head slightly and whispered, "You stay inside." Lena froze. That was the first sentence Noah had spoken to her. In a flash, he was gone. Lena pressed herself against the window, trying to follow him with her eyes, but in a blink, she'd lost him. The shadow in the field had vanished too. Just then, a creak sounded from the barn roof. Then, somewhere farther away, a horse neighed sharply. Lena ran back inside and leaned against the door. Her heart was pounding out of her chest. Hours later, as the icy morning sun rose, Lena opened the door. She ran to the barn. The animals were uneasy, but none of them were harmed. But there were strange footprints in the snow. Not boots, moccasins. Mixed with something else in the mud. Not feet. More like paws. And on the ground, a corner of the blanket stained with blood. Lena's hands trembled. She turned at the sound of a quiet step behind her. It was Noah. He had a scratch on his cheek, a small cut near his right temple. But he was standing. In his hand was Lena's old axe, and in his eyes was the look of someone who had faced something in the dark. "Who was it?" Lena asked, panicking for the first time. Noah shook his head. "We don't know yet," he said, his second sentence. "But someone's tracking us." In that moment, Lena understood this wasn't just about a misunderstanding or a tradition or a blanket. Something had begun. Someone saw this quiet bond as a threat. An enemy was coming, one that didn't belong to Lena or Noah, or maybe either of them. Lena remembered Elias's words. "Tomorrow, there are things we need to talk about." But tomorrow had already begun. Noah looked her straight in the eyes. For the first time directly, without fear. "They're coming," he said. "And this time, they won't be silent." Lena noticed it while trying to wipe away the blood-stained patch of snow behind the barn with water. This land didn't just belong to her anymore. Everything had changed meaning. Silence, winter, even the past. Noah stood like a stone in the corner of the barn, watching Lena's every move. His gaze wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either, like the trembling of a plane just before takeoff. There was a quiet tension in his body. His eyes were fixed on the ground, his ears tuned to the wind. Breakfast hadn't happened. The events of the night hadn't turned into words yet. But both of them felt the same thing: something was coming. The footsteps that showed up before dawn, the fresh wound on Noah's forehead, the strange whispers heard in the dark. They were just the beginning. And the only thing Lena knew for sure was that no one ever knocked on her door without a reason. By midday, when a lone rider appeared on the far ridge, Lena grabbed her rifle and stepped out onto the porch. But Noah stopped her. "He's one of ours," he said, his voice so steady that Lena backed down. It was Elias. He got off his horse and walked slowly toward the house. In his hand was an old leather pouch. His eyes stayed on Lena for a long time. "There are things I need to tell you," he said. "But first, are you ready to listen?" Lena bowed her head. Silence meant yes. They went inside. Noah pulled back into the corner, like he already knew what was going to be said. Elias sat down and placed the pouch on the table. From it, he pulled out a few yellowed pieces of cloth, a small carved bone figure, and an old hair clip. Lena's eyes stopped on the clip. It looked like something a woman would wear. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he began. When Noah was born, the winter was like this. Silent, angry. His mother came from another tribe. She wasn't loved on our lands. But you can't tell your heart what to do. He took her. We accepted her. Not everyone did. Noah's existence was a shame for both sides. Neither his mother's people nor his father's ever truly accepted him. We raised him, but they always called him half. Lena looked at Noah. His head was lowered, but his eyes weren't on Elias. They were somewhere deep inside himself. Elias kept going. Years later, his mother's people came back. They made a demand. There was conflict. They forced Noah to choose. He didn't go, but staying had a cost. Since then, some still say he doesn't belong. The shadow that scared you last night. They came from that side, and that was just the beginning. A cold mist settled over Lena's chest. What happens now? She whispered. Elias stood up slowly. The blanket you gave him, yes, it was a kind gesture. But to them, it looked like a challenge. In our ways, when a woman covers a man, she binds him to life. But to the other side, they saw it as an insult. Now, it's not just Noah. You're a target too. Lena looked up at the ceiling of her home. It felt like even the roof couldn't keep the threat out. Then she turned to Noah. What do you want? She asked. Noah didn't answer, but he slowly stepped forward, picked up the bone-carved figure from the pouch, and rubbed it with his fingers. Then he looked up. I don't want a war, he said. But if they're coming, then this house isn't just a shelter anymore. It's a border. That night, Lena didn't lock her door. She stoked the stoves, checked the windows. Noah stayed in the barn. As Elias left, he'd said, I'll come again tomorrow night. But Lena was sure something else would come before then. Because that night, the moon was strangely red. And the wind wasn't whispering Noah's past anymore, it was whispering Lena's future. The silence that came before nightfall felt different than usual. Lena sensed it right away. The wind was blowing. Yes, but it didn't move a single leaf. The sky was gray, but no snow was falling. All of nature seemed to be waiting for something, like a person squinting their eyes and holding their breath. Noah had spent the day setting traps around the barn. He placed dry branches, tied ropes to trees, moved like an old hunter. Lena had quietly watched him. She hadn't asked any questions, hadn't offered help. But each stake he drove into the ground, each knot he tied, felt like it was also filling the empty spaces inside Lena. The area around her house wasn't just property anymore, it was a line of defense. Toward sunset, Elias returned, just as he promised. But he wasn't alone. 3 more men came with him, young in age, but their eyes carried the darkness of men who had seen war. As Lena looked at them, she realized something: she wasn't alone anymore. But this didn't mean she was safe either. Elias spread out a piece of paper on the table that looked like a makeshift map. These are tracks, he said, not just signs of following. Intimidation. They were left on purpose. They're coming, but we don't know when, from where, or how many. Noah spoke. They like the dark. If they come, it'll be at night. Elias nodded. When the stars are hiding. Lena looked out the window. The snow hadn't started yet, but the air was holding something. It felt like the sky was about to let go of a secret. Just then, one of the lamps inside flickered. And at that exact moment, a scream came from the barn. Not a clear scream, not an animal sound. It wasn't human either. It was a warning. Noah was the first to jump into action. Elias and the others followed. Lena grabbed her rifle, threw on her shoes, and stepped onto the porch. Darkness had fallen around the house, but she could still make out movement. Someone came down from the barn roof. A black silhouette. 2 more figures appeared under the tree. The attack had begun. Gunfire tore through the night. For the first time, Lena's hands didn't shake. The bullet she fired hit a shadow in the knee. A groan. Then silence. But the others were much faster. Noah was fighting 2 men. Elias was wrestling with a third, and despite his age, he stood tall like a mountain. When Lena turned at a rustling sound behind the house, it was too late. A figure had come up behind her. She was knocked down. Her rifle flew from her hands. Her breath was knocked out of her chest. As she hit the ground, she grabbed a rock from the mud. She saw her attacker's face unmasked, young, angry. He had wore paint on his face, but his eyes were filled with nothing but fear. Lena threw the rock. The young man stumbled, and in that moment of hesitation, Noah appeared. Without a second thought, he took the attacker down. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Lena was on the ground, Noah above her, both their hands buried in the mud. Then, from far away, a horn sounded long, high-pitched, and ominous. And then it started to snow. Quietly, slowly, the attackers retreated. They didn't scream victory, they didn't make threats. They left the way they came, blending into the shadows. But Lena knew. This wasn't an attack. It was a message, a test. And the real storm hadn't even started yet. When night was over, Noah silently took the blanket and sat on the porch. Snow fell onto his shoulders, but he didn't move. Lena came out and stood beside him. She didn't kneel. She didn't sit. She just asked, "Why are you still here?" Noah turned his head. "Because you gave me the blanket, but you never took it back." Lena didn't respond. She just reached out and gently pulled on the edge of the blanket. But she didn't take it away. In that moment, something new began to take root between two people on snow-covered ground. A bond built not by blood, but by choice. The next morning, the snow hadn't just covered the fields, it had also covered what happened during the night. The only things left were footprints and a silence that was hard to erase. Elias and his men had gone to track the direction the attackers came from. Lena was alone. The house still carried Noah's scent. Smoke, earth, a bit of blood, but most of all, emptiness and unanswered questions. In the afternoon, the sound of hooves startled her. She looked out the window and saw Noah. But he wasn't alone. 3 others were with him, young, armed, and with faces that didn't shy away from staring straight at her. They stopped in front of the house. Lena opened the door. Her face showed neither welcome nor refusal. She simply said, "Come." Noah stepped inside, but the other 3 stayed at the door. A chill ran down Lena's spine. This wasn't a visit. It was a reckoning. Noah turned around. "This is Samuel," he said, "and the others are my cousins." Samuel stepped forward. "We're going to ask you a question," he said to Lena. His voice was polite, but it sounded like it was filled with stones. "Do you expect me to be scared?" Lena asked, her voice cracking slightly. Samuel didn't answer. He pulled a leather cord from inside his jacket. At the end were 3 knots. "In our people's ways, if someone accidentally starts something but shows loyalty in the end, they prove it," he said. 3 knots, 3 steps. With each knot, one truth is asked. If you run, it's counted as a lie. Lena narrowed her eyes and looked at Noah. "Are you going to protect me?" she asked. Noah's answer was simple. "This isn't something you get through by being protected." Lena took a deep breath. She accepted the cord. Samuel handed her the cord and pointed to the first knot. "Why did you give him the blanket?" There wasn't a ready answer, but a voice inside her said, "Loneliness." I saw my own loneliness in him. I didn't just cover him, I covered myself too. Samuel bowed his head. "Second knot. If you had known what this bond meant, would you still have given it?" Lena paused. The wind licked the window. "Yes," she finally said, "because even if I didn't understand the meaning, it felt right." Third knot. Samuel's eyes sharpened this time. "Do you feel a sense of belonging to Noah?" Lena's hands pressed into the fibers of the cord. Her fingers clenched. Then she looked up. "I don't own him," she said, "but there's something inside me. A quiet place, and only his footsteps echo there." Samuel stepped back. He took the cord. He didn't say anything, but this time, his look wasn't made of ice. Then he turned outside. He signaled to the other 2. "That's enough," he said. They all got back on their horses and disappeared into the snow. Lena realized she had been holding her breath. Before closing the door, she looked at Noah. "Your people still don't trust me," she said. Noah nodded. "They're right, because I still don't trust myself." That night, the fire was lit earlier than usual. The wind outside picked up speed, but inside, there was a different kind of warmth now. When Lena approached the window, she saw Elias at the barn door. He was alone. He moved inside like a ghost, sat at the table, took a piece of paper out of his pocket. Old, torn. He handed it to Lena. There were only 3 words written on it. "Fire gives rebirth." "What does this mean?" Lena asked. Elias turned his eyes to Noah. "Tomorrow night, they'll come again. But this time, it'll be the end. You'll either stay with us or disappear with the snow." Lena didn't speak. Her eyes turned to the blanket. It was still on Noah's shoulders. But it wasn't just his anymore. Lena's past, her future, and who she was had all been woven into that fabric now. This time, Lena asked the question, "And you, Noah, do you still want to leave?" Noah didn't answer right away. Then he whispered, "It's not wanting to leave that's scary. It's having to want to stay." The night had never been this quiet. The wind wasn't scraping the sky, it was scraping Lena's heart. The house was warm, but the weight of waiting had seeped into every corner. 2 cups of coffee sat on the table, untouched. Noah knelt by the stove, that familiar blanket in his lap, unraveling the threads at the edge with his fingertips. Lena was watching him. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, but something else. Maybe acceptance, maybe readiness. Outside, Elias was waiting. Only 2 men remained with him now. The others had left, some out of fear, some out of resignation. But Elias hadn't moved. "Final trial," he had said. "Either we stand tonight, or we don't see morning." The snow had been falling steadily since the afternoon. Lena opened the window and looked out. There were no tracks in the yard, just a smooth, white sheet underneath it. The weight of the past, the danger of the present, and the stirring of an unknown tomorrow. And then the sound came. A horn in the distance, this time deeper, more echoing. Then the sound of horses' hooves. Every step hammered into Lena's chest like a nail. The house was being surrounded, but not in secret, not in hiding. This time, it was open, deliberate. They weren't shadows. They were people, not just warriors, figures who walked like judges. Lena grabbed her rifle, but her hands didn't shake this time. She stood at the door. Noah quietly stepped beside her. "Don't just let them come in," he said. "Before you open that door, remember what this was." "What it was?" Lena asked, locking eyes with him. Noah threw the blanket over his shoulder. "It was just a blanket," he said. "But then it became a choice. And now, we share the cost of that choice." No one knocked on the door. It was pushed open slowly. Snow drifted inside. Elias stood at the threshold, 3 figures behind him, faces she didn't know, but it was clear they were not friends. They said nothing, but their eyes spoke with noise. "In this house lies a woman's decision," Elias said, standing in the doorway. And a man's silence. The man in front stepped forward. He held no weapon, but his voice was sharp as a blade. "Pull her from our path," he said to Noah, "or you'll both be buried." Noah stepped in front of Lena. "She walks our path now." Silence. Then a scream. A blow from behind. One of Elias's men dropped to the ground. Then the darkness burst open. Arrows, shouting, the scrape of metal on metal. The house was surrounded by chaos. Lena fired her rifle for the first time, not to kill, but to protect Noah. Noah was grappling with a man. His feet slipping, falling but rising again every time. Lena never stepped past the doorway, but she stood like a wall, guarding the entrance. It felt like hours, not minutes. Snow fell over the fighting, covering the blood, erasing the tracks. Finally, silence returned. But this time, it was a different silence. Spent. Hollow. Still. There were wounded on the ground. Bodies outside. Elias was on his knees. Noah stood, out of breath, hands covered in blood but still standing. Then Lena spoke. Her voice didn't tremble. It wasn't loud, just clear. "This house doesn't belong to me anymore. This house is a choice. And who stays here won't be decided by battle but by silence." No one answered. When morning came, the snow was still falling but the air felt lighter. The sky hadn't forgotten the night, but it wasn't screaming anymore. It was just watching. Lena and Noah sat side by side on the porch. This time, the blanket was draped over both their shoulders. Elias stood near the barn, staring into the distance. "Is it over?" Lena whispered. Noah turned his head slightly. "No," he said, "but there's no more running." Lena clasped her hands over the edge of the blanket. "So, what happens now?" Noah didn't answer, but he smiled for the first time, truly. And Lena smiled with him, because she knew some battles weren't won with weapons, they were won by staying. And sometimes, a single blanket could be the place where 2 lives joined. The Yindy, by the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.